This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. And I'm from a new setting here for the good news and bad news about money. And I'm broadcasting now from my home studio, which I had built in here, so I can be a little bit more professional from home. And our special guest today is a longtime friend and a man of credible knowledge. It's Jim Rickards. He's the author of his newest book is Sold Out. But I came across Jim when I read his book, Currency Wars. And man, are we in a currency war today? Another thing that Jim said was that, the avalanche is all it needs, that last snowflake. And then what happened after 2008, what they did was they kept dropping interest rates like this, but the debt went up like this. And then we had crypto invented in between that time. And the last snowflake hit, he was called Sam Bankman-Fried or something, FTX and FTT and all this. So Jim's book, Currency Wars, is as prescient as it comes. So we're going to do, what do you see in 2023? I want to warn people on something is, when I was a kid, we always said, don't trust anybody over 30. In this environment, I don't trust anybody under 30. And the reason for that is all they've known is a rising market. And as you get old enough, markets go up and markets come down. And my concern is, I'm not saying it's Jim's opinion, but I think we're heading in for the roughest markets we've ever had, because Ben Bernanke, the Nobel Peace Prize winner or Nobel Economics Prize, he raises interest rates. It's the biggest bubble in world history. And when that air comes out, we're in serious trouble. So this is one more way of saying that under 30 people, all they know is don't fight the Fed, buy the dip, real estate always goes up and all this stuff. I think those days, as they say in Hawaii, are aloha. I think we're going into a very rough economy. So one more thing is, when I watch YouTube now, which I didn't have growing up, there are more experts on YouTube now who are full of shit. I can't believe the crap they're putting out there. So if you're cruising YouTube and you're looking for some credible source out there, you got to be careful who your sources are, because you can be a YouTube genius, but be another Sam Bankman-Fried, whatever his name is. So the reason I trust Jim Rickards, he's over 30. He has gone through hell. And he's gone through hell. We have experience in all this. But the most important reason for me bringing Jim on board, he is a credible source. He's worked for the CIA, the Defense Department, and all this. He's been part of one of the biggest real market crashes on long-term capital management. And all of those things give us the most priceless value in education. It's called experience. And so Jim is on board. We're going to do 4 shows together. What do you see in 2023? Jim is a visionary. He's a futurist. He can see. I follow his advice. But I caution you, just because somebody is on YouTube making claims of what they can do for you, be very, very careful. So when I have a question, I call Jim a friend. I can call him and I can get credible, what I say, factual plus depth of information that most people under 30 do not have. So we're going to do 4 of these series together, back to back. What do you see in 2023? And Jim, welcome to the Rich Dad program. And as I said, I value our friendship, but more important, I value your experience and your depth of knowledge, because we're older than 30. So
well, thank you, Robert. Great to be with you, and I appreciate the kind words, and I'll reciprocate. You're one of the people I look to and follow your work and follow your shows and broadcasts and a lot else besides. So it's a great relationship, and I am definitely over 30, so I'll confirm that.
Yeah. So what you have so many, I've read your books, you have so many things that are priceless. Like you were doing ding ding or something. It's about how they program you for little bells and stuff like this. And on your, if your key is not, your seat belt's not on and all this stuff. I'm going, holy mackerel. I mean, you look at everything from such micro and macro, how we're being programmed to be pawns of the system. So we're going to do, this is the first of the things, and I'm going to ask a quick question. What is the first thing you see for 2023 people should be aware of?
Well, we're going to talk about four things, and we'll start with one right now. But I'll caution our viewers that my list might be, pardon me, my list might be quite different from other people's lists. This time of year, yeah, the forecasting business is at an all-time high. Everyone's got, stock market projections and bond market projections or things to look out for in 2023, and that's fine. A lot of good contributors from a lot of sources, but based on probably the way I combine not just economics, but also geopolitics, bring them together. They've always been connected to some extent, but they've never been more interconnected, more merged than they are right now. And so I think bringing that perspective will maybe give us a different list, but that's a good thing because we can contribute something the viewers might not be hearing elsewhere. I would drop one footnote to your introductory remark, Robert, about a younger generation. Yeah, 30, no reason to pick on 30-year-olds. If you're under 50, you've never seen some of the bear markets, something like the Great Depression or even 1987, the stock market dropped 20 1987. It wasn't 22% in a week or a month or a year. It was one day. So if you're, say, younger than a certain age, and it's way over 30, you've never seen anything like that. I've seen some of it, and I also read quite a bit of economic history. I wasn't around for the Great Depression. You have to be 100 years old to say you lived through that one, but I'm pretty familiar with it as well. But the one footnote I would drop is that you said people haven't seen these kind of market crashes. Well, not the Great Depression, that's for sure, but they have seen market crashes, but they've also seen it come back every single time, and that's what's different. So yeah, we got through 1998, we got through the dot-com crash, we got through 2008, we got through 2020 and COVID. There's actually a good size market drawdown in 2018 between October 1st, 2018 and Christmas Eve, what I call the Christmas Eve massacre. Stock markets dropped 20% in under 3 months when the Fed kept raising interest rates, even though the economy was weakening. So they have seen those, but every single time it came back, even in COVID, March, April 2020, the stock market went down 30%. It did. I mean, just almost straight down. But by September, we were back to new all-time highs. And so it's not that they've never seen that kind of volatility, but they learned the wrong lesson, which is it always comes back. And we know why, because the Fed bails you out, the Fed floods the zone with money, the Fed talks it up, et cetera. But the counter example, in 1929, when the stock market did crash, it was down 23% over 2 days. It was like a 12% day and an 11% day in late October 1929, but it kept going. The stock market crashed in October 1929, but it bottomed in June 1932. That was a 3-year moving crash or rolling crash, whatever you want to call it, with some rallies along the way. And the total damage was over 80%, not 30%, not 40%, down 80%. And what people don't know, many people don't know, is you said, okay, then it rallied in 1933 and 1934. The Fed messed up again and blundered again, as they usually do, in 1937 and threw us into a double dip. But if you ask people, okay, well, everyone knows the stock market crashed in 1929. When did it regain those highs? How long did that take? The answer is 25 years. It was
1954.
It was 1954 before the market recovered from 1929. Now, it doesn't mean there weren't gains along the way or you couldn't make money. You could. But if you say, oh, I'll just sit tight and wait till it comes back. Well, a lot of people didn't live long enough. They didn't live 20. They never saw their money back because they didn't live 25 more years. So that's a real bear market. It's happened before. And so the point is you need to be prepared for things like that. And there are no one alive, but very few people alive have seen anything like that. So that's I think that's the right framework to put it in. And if you say, well, what if we had another market crash right now? We'll talk about reasons why in a second. Why couldn't the Fed just come right back in and, print some more money and do the same thing over again and bail out the new failures, whoever they may be, whether it's I call him Sam Bankman-Fraud, not Sam Bankman-Fried, but some people call him son of Sam Bankman-Fried. You know, just they're
They're too
coming to
young to
sell
know
us,
who Son of
sell us
Sam is.
Bankman-Fried.
Hey,
What's that?
Jim, they're too young to know who Son of Sam is.
Well, you can look it up. He's a serial killer, and this guy Sam Bankman-Fraud is a serial killer of net worth. But yeah, there's you know, you can just kind of keep bailing things out. Why not do it again? What's the big deal? Well, the answer is each bailout is bigger than the one before. And that's the point. You can go all the way back 1994, Mexico, 1998, Russia, LTCM, 2000 dot-com, 2008 Lehman, 2020 pandemic. And they do bail out, but each one's bigger than the one before. I mean, we threw out 6 or 7, actually, I think $7 trillion of new debt on top of a $1 trillion a year baseline, $7 trillion in new debt to kind of dig our way out of 2020. So there's a limit. There comes a time it's like, hey, this bailout is going to be 20 trillion. You know, sorry, that check's too big. We're going to have to let some things fail. So what could happen? The first thing on my list is the China COVID situation. Now, let me just kind of give a quick background and I'll explain what China's doing and why it's going to fail and why it's a really, really big deal. For the last 3 years, they've been pursuing what's called the zero COVID policy. And zero COVID means what it says. So like if there's one person who gets infected, they quarantine you in your apartment. And using extreme measures in some cases. They've actually had teams come in hazmat suits and weld steel I-beams to the outside of your door so you couldn't get outside your apartment. If 7 or 8 people get it, they shut down a whole neighborhood. 30 people, they shut down a whole city. We're talking Shanghai, 26 million people, Beijing, 22 million people, and other cities, Xi'an, Chongqing. You know, I've actually been to Wuhan, I've been to all these cities, and they're huge. Nobody in, nobody out. Or if you do, you have to have a negative COVID test, but it can't be more than 48 hours old. So you got to get tested 3 times a week. And they have testing tents every 3 blocks in the city, and you know, masks and all. By the way, none of this stuff works, by the way, but they make you do it. They have COVID concentration camps where they ship people outside the city limits and put them in quarantine, etc. Extremely, extremely damaging to the economy. Can you contain the COVID? Yeah, but at a multi-billion-dollar cost, not to mention social disruption, etc. And it doesn't work in the long run. It can contain it in the short run at enormous cost. Absolutely does not work in the long run. Well, but it was all done for political reasons because Chairman Xi Jinping wanted to get his 3rd term, unprecedented, by the way, since Mao Zedong, as the new emperor, the new communist emperor of China. So, so he did. He got the, you know, the 3rd term, and here we are. So suddenly there are massive riots, demonstrations all over the country, breaking down barricades, tearing down testing tents, storming through cities, hanging banners. And if you're the leadership, do they care about people's welfare? No, but they remember Tiananmen Square, 1989, when they put it down by killing thousands of people. No one knows how many, but they massacred 3 or 4, perhaps more thousand people in and around Tiananmen Square to suppress that. And they saw it sort of happening again. So they threw in the towel on COVID. They said, okay, we're just going to let it go, let it rip. They don't put it that way, but that's what they're doing. And they're saying, okay, now you can self-quarantine. You know, you don't need tests, you don't need travel permissions. You can just go, but, you know, be careful, wash your hands, basically. So what's going to happen next? Everyone, and of course, Wall Street has always got the pom-poms out, the Wall Street cheerleaders, you know, buy stocks, buy Chinese stocks. I wouldn't touch China with a, you know, 10-foot pole or maybe a 6-foot pole, since that's the social distancing range, which is another piece of medical nonsense, by the way. But so the bulls are saying, well, now get in China because they're reopening and they're going to get going. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for 2 reasons. Number one, this thing's ripped. Now, the math is pretty simple. It's not complicated. It's a population of 1.4 billion people. Assume a 30% infection rate, which I think is conservative. A lot of estimates, some people say 50 to 60% before you achieve what they call herd immunity. But let's just say 30% to be on the conservative side. That's 420 million people are going to be infected with COVID in the coming months.
How many?
420 million.
Jeez.
That's 30% of 1.4 billion.
But that's more than the population of the United States.
Correct. A lot more. That's exactly right. So the 420 million infected, that's with a 30%. By the way, that number could be 600 million if you get up to a 60%, even a 50% infection rate. Let's just say 420 million. The fatality rate is 0.25%, which is quite low, meaning 99.75% survival rate. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is 0.25% of 420 million is 1 million. You're talking about 1 million dead. And again, that's conservative. Some estimates, again, I've seen 1.5 million. 1.5 million dead, okay? But how many are in hospitals? How many are in ICU beds? They don't have the ICU beds. They have some, but they don't have nearly enough to. So it's not just a question of the fatality rates. It's a question of what can you do to offer medical treatment or any kind of assistance to the 400 million or more people who are infected. So first of all, that's going to shut down that's inevitable. That's the math. It's not speculation. That's going to do more damage to the economy than the lockdown. In other words, the zero COVID policy. In other words, China has no good way out, because zero COVID, you're going to cause a revolution, and it doesn't work. If you let it rip, you got 1 million to 1.5 million dead, plus hundreds of millions. Not in the medical, kind of coming out of my book, sold out about the supply chain. Go to your local CVS or Rite Aid or Walgreens or whatever pharmacy you have. Try getting ibuprofen, Tamiflu, just over-the-counter medications. What when I was a kid used to call it cough medicine, but whatever, the equivalent today. Can't get it, or the shelves are bare. Because why? We get that from China. 80 to 90% of those over-the-counter medications come from China. The Chinese know what I just said. They know their medical facilities can't handle what's coming, so they're going to have to self-medicate. So they're hoarding that stuff themselves, stripping it off the shelves, which means we don't get any because they can't ship it to us because they're hoarding it because they don't have enough hospitals. So this is, you see, you get an central order from Beijing, ripples through the Chinese population, and all of a sudden moms and dads in Phoenix or Boston can't get ibuprofen. So, and by the way, the Chinese economy was in trouble anyway. The idea that China's robust and growing, too bad about the COVID, that's not true. And COVID's a disaster, humanitarian medical disaster. But China was suffering anyway because of too much debt, real estate collapse, decoupling from the U.S., technological lags, cutting off their ability to steal our intellectual property, and a lot else besides. So China is probably going to have negative growth this year, maybe even negative growth next year. There's not going to be some great reopening. There's not if you're invested, get out. If you're not invested, don't go in, because it's a disaster.
So, Jim, like I said, this is the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. But also when we come back again, this is section 1 with Jim Rickards. What do you see in 2023? So Jim's talking about what he sees coming from China. His latest book is sold out. The first book I read of Jim was Currency Wars. And now we have Sam Bankman Fraud. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. So this is what do you see in 23? And we come back, we'll be continuing on what does Jim say. Again, this is part 1 of 4 series. And the best way to not be a victim of what's coming is to see what's coming. So we'll be right back.
Robert's been warning us for years, time after time after time, his golden rule: invest in real assets. That's how he didn't just survive the last period of catastrophic inflation, he thrived, turning his first property into a real estate empire of over 7,000 units. But with history possibly repeating itself, real estate is being crushed under the thumb of the Fed, and we could be on the verge of another historic crash. Combined with rising inflation, the landing may be even harder than last time. But according to BlackRock CEO CEO, Larry Fink, the largest asset manager in the world, there's one real asset that investors need to know about. Because of its resilience during times like these, Fink even calls it the new gold. He's talking about fine art. It makes sense. The last time inflation was this high, fine art handedly outpaced inflation, appreciating an average 130%. Now, fine art can be part of your portfolio for a fraction of what billionaires like Fink pay. All thanks to Masterworks. It's the new tech platform that lets you invest in shares of paintings by Warhol, Picasso, and Banksy, and the results so far have been incredible. With 9 paintings sold, the last 3 returning 13, 17, and 21% net. No wonder over 600,000 users have invested more than $500 million on Masterworks. And here's the best part. You can skip their waitlist and try Masterworks for free by going to masterworks.art/richdad. That's masterworks.art/richdad. See important disclosures at masterworks.com/CD. Hey everyone, it's Sarah at the Rich Dad Radio Show. Let me tell you, good sleep is the ultimate game changer, and the 8 Sleep Pod is the ultimate sleep machine. I live in Arizona. It's over 100 degrees today, and it's only expected to get hotter throughout the week. And the pod is the only sleep technology that dynamically cools and heats each side of the bed to maintain the optimal sleeping temperature for what your body needs. With the pod, you can start sleeping as cool as 55 degrees Fahrenheit or as hot as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And clinical data shows that 8 Sleep users experience up to 19% increase in recovery, up to 32% improvement in sleep quality, and up to 34% more deep sleep. And 8 Sleep recently just launched the next generation of the pod. The new Pod 3 enables more accurate sleep and health tracking with double the amount of sensors, delivering you the best sleep experience on Earth. And all you need to do is go to 8sleep.com/richdad to start sleeping cool this summer and save up to $150 on the pod. 8 Sleep currently ships within the USA, Canada, the UK, select countries in the EU, and Australia.
Feeling powerless over current events and your financial future? Financial freedom is your freedom. Robert Kiyosaki is the best-selling author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Over 40 million people have taken Robert's advice. Now it's your turn. Attend Robert's free virtual wealth building event. Claim your free access now at richdadfree.com. Don't wait, access is limited. Go to richdadfree.com. That's richdadfree.com.
Welcome back. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And you can always look at our view our programs again on richdadradio.com. And we recommend you people listen to it again, because repetition is one of the best ways to learn. Listen to this program again, you'll learn even more. And our special guest today is, like I was talking about it earlier, today with YouTube filled with all these experts, who do you know who's credible? You know, you can be an expert on YouTube, but be another bankman fraud in real life. So our guest today is Jim Rickards, and he and I are both over 30, and we've both been through the mill a number of times, and it gives, a little pain causes your vision to improve into the future. So this is the first one of a series of 4 with Jim Rickards. What do you see in 2023? And I think, and his latest book is sold out. And the reason that's important, because the first part of this program was on China. And China is supply chain. So our supply chain is now disrupted big time. And as Jim says, supply chain is the economy. In other words, if you can't get aspirin, you can't get this, you can't get toilet paper, you're in serious trouble. It is the economy. So with that, welcome back, Jim, for this is the first part of 4. What do you see in 2023? And we're discussing China. And I'll give you, please talk about sold out really quickly, because this is the other day I was thinking about you. I was eating blueberries. Now, generally blueberries, I believe, come from Vermont, but here it is hardcore winter. And I think my blueberries were coming from Ecuador. That's supply chain, right?
Absolutely. That's a long supply chain. I don't know the exact distance, but probably a good, 4,000 or 5,000 miles. One of it could be semiconductors or oil or blueberries, but stuff moves all over the world. That's exactly right. And it's being very disrupted right now.
So what else so this is well, number one of a series of What Do You See 23. You're talking about China, and there was that program called Evergrande, which was their big real estate crash. And, I mean, China's in serious trouble, and now COVID. So what do you see coming, for China? What do you want to talk about for the first part of a 4-part series?
Well, we did. We spoke about China and covered that pretty in depth. So just to turn to the next thing I see in 2023 having a major impact on markets, I would say the situation in Ukraine. And there's a lot more there than just, there's obviously a war going on, clear, and Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the background of that. I have some pretty strong views. I think they're pretty well documented. Everyone's like, Russia's the bad guy because they invaded. Okay, they did invade, but they were being provoked for 14 years. George Bush stood up in 2008 and said that he thought Ukraine and Georgia should be in NATO. And a few months later, Putin invaded Georgia and made sure Georgia would never join NATO. And then in 2014, the U.S. and UK staged a coup, using the CIA and MI6 to overthrow a pro-Russian president of Ukraine. He was duly elected. They had an election. I'm not saying he was a great guy, but he was duly elected. He was pro-Russian, looking to enter into some trade linkages with Russia, and the U.S. and UK intelligence services staged a coup. Threw him out. He ran out for Russia. We put in a puppet government, and then Putin invaded and took Crimea. So first Bush makes a clumsy statement, Putin invades Georgia. Then they stage a coup and Putin invades Crimea. And at that point, you're supposed to say, what part of the word invade do you not understand? In other words, Putin is telling us, don't go there. Ukraine's not going to join NATO. You've crossed a red line. Then he invaded Georgia and Crimea to show he was serious. And the U.S. still wasn't listening. Either that or we were listening and we wanted the war. And that's really my view. I think the warmongers, Victoria Nuland, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Susan Rice, and there are others, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Vindman, this whole warmonger crowd wanted this war, and they got it. So here's your war. Now, the war is tragic. It's brutal. That's what war is. And that's been going on for a while. But there is a financial, economic war wrapped around the military kinetic war, because the U.S., we've been supplying weapons to Ukraine and training, and Poland. A lot of the so-called Ukrainian troops are actually Polish troops wearing Ukrainian army uniforms because so many of the Ukrainian troops have been killed. Various weapon systems are being supplied. There's a drone war going on. Iran's giving drones to Russia. The U.S. has, its own drones. They're supplying them to Ukraine, et cetera. So that's been pretty well vetted. But the economic financial war around it, the U.S. has put sanctions on Russia. The U.S., but also make it clear, the U.S. and the EU and the UK and other allies have joined these sanctions against Russia, and they are unprecedented. And by the way, I spent a long part of my career working on sanctions. The financial warfare, exactly the kind of thing we're talking about now, is what I have done for over 10 years, longer actually, for the intelligence community. I worked on supporting intelligence support for the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., which looks at deals where foreign companies are buying U.S. companies, and you ask yourself, is there a national security threat here? It's not an antitrust review or securities law review. It's a national security review. And I used to do what we call collections, intelligence collections, to support that analysis. And I teach financial work at War College. So it's just one of my specialties, and I know a lot about it. And when sanctions were announced, just to kind of give some examples. Sorry, Robert. So we froze the reserves of the Central Bank of Russia, completely unprecedented. We froze the reserves of oligarchs. We kicked the Russian banking system out of the international SWIFT message traffic system, that's where big banks record large transfers to each other. It's kind of the nerve center, the beating heart, if you will, of the global financial system, based in Belgium, and Russia has been kicked out of that, and a lot else besides. Limits on Russian oil exports. price caps on Russian oil, and so forth. And then Russia's retaliated. They've banned certain exports of strategic metals, fertilizer, grain, and other essential goods to the rest of the world, or at least to countries that are participating in the U.S. sanctions. So I don't want to spend too much time going down the whole list. It's a long list, but the point is it has been highly, highly disruptive to the to the supply chain and the food chain. It's contributed to inflation, and it's getting worse. So that much we know. We already know that, and it's a very big deal. What could get worse?
Let me interrupt real quickly. Again, Jim's latest book is called Sold Out. He's talking about supply chain. So this war in Russia and Ukraine is really a supply chain issue. That's how it affects you and me and all this. But isn't Ukraine also an exporter of food throughout the world?
Well, if you combine Russia and Ukraine, they provide 25% of global exports of wheat, 35% global exports of barley. Russia provides a large percentage of global fertilizer exports. So the answer is yes, absolutely. And if you look at it from the importing point of view, you say, okay, so Russia and Ukraine are 25% of the world's exports of wheat. It doesn't mean they grow that much wheat. It just means they export that much wheat. The U.S. grows more wheat, but we use it ourselves. We feed cows and pigs and make ethanol and do all kinds of other things with it. But Russia and Ukraine export a lot of it. But from the point of view of countries, you say, well, who gets their food from Ukraine and Russia? There you find countries get 75 to 90% of their food from those two places. And that includes countries like with large populations, Egypt, Sudan, countries in the Middle East, Kenya, and others, and many others. It's a long list. I actually took that list and added up.
So Jim,
yes.
You're saying those countries you mentioned, because of this war in the Ukraine, which was, we pissed off Russia, saying, they wanted Ukraine to join NATO and all this stuff. But
right.
Now the supply chain, which is your book, Sold Out, is the food now goes into those countries like Sudan and all that. Does that mean that their prices will go up for food, but the possibility of starvation goes up too?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not just about price. There's money around. You can get subsidies, but starvation is a bigger problem. And they've been scrambling since the war started last February. To the extent they've been getting anything, they've been drawing down reserves from the year before. So there is grain storage, and there was some left. But now the reserves have been drawn down. Some exports are trickling through, but it's a very small amount. And believe it or not, some of the exports are going to Europe, which has other resources. And so starvation is a real... You may end up with more people dying of starvation than dying in the war. But this is playing out in real time. I was not saying everything's happened right now. It's happening, and it's going to get worse as the winter progresses. So, for example, Boeing, they talk about the supply chain. Boeing gets, how do you make airplanes? Well, they make them from aluminum and titanium. Where's that come from? Well, about 40% of it comes from Russia. What about farmers in Argentina, farmers in Brazil, farmers in parts of the United States, for that matter? How do you grow crops? Well, you need nitrogen fertilizer. Where does nitrogen fertilizer come from? A lot of it comes from Russia. So when you start throwing these sanctions, it's one thing to sit in a little bubble office in Washington and say, I'm going to throw this sanction on you, or you and this guy, Wally Adeyemo, is in charge. Janet Yellen doesn't understand anything we're discussing right now, but she's a deputy named Wally Adeyemo. Pretty smart guy, but he's like never had a real job. He worked in the National Security Council under Obama. He was president.
So Jim, this goes back to the first book I read of yours, which was Currency Wars. Oh. When you throw sanctions on somebody, that's a currency war also, isn't it?
Well, that's correct. And it comes around at boomerangs. And this is what I was teaching at the U.S. Army War College. And I had a lot of skepticism from the class. I have to admit, it was seminar style. It was only 12 people, the top mid-career big brains who are going to be future, 3 or 4-star generals, future national security advisors. That group are my class, as I say, at the mid-career stage. They were skeptical. That's fine. I encourage that. But I said, here are the sanctions. Here's what we're going to do. None of it's going to work. And it's going to be worse than that, because it's going to boomerang and hurt us. And that's what I told them. And that's exactly what's happened. The Russian ruble, remember Joe Biden saying, we're going to crush the Russian ruble. The ruble today is stronger in foreign exchange markets than it was before the war. et cetera. So Russia's oil revenues are up. The quantity might be down, but the price was up from where it was, and so they're making more money. And the foreign exchange reserves are fine. By the way, 20% in gold. So you can't freeze the gold. You can freeze dollars, you can freeze treasury securities, but not the gold. So what could get worse than what we just described? And all this is continuing and getting worse, and that's a big factor for 2023. Unfortunately, we are on a path to nuclear war. And
Nuclear war? Wait, did you say that?
Nuclear war. And I studied nuclear war fighting beginning in the late 1960s. And what I studied in the late 1960s, most of it was written by scholars in the late 1950s. That was the early part of the Cold War, the early part of the nuclear age, when some big brains were working on this. And the scholars are Herman Kahn, who wrote a book called On Thermonuclear War. It's still in print, 600-page, warfighting manual. Herman Kahn, Henry Kissinger, Albert Wolstetter, Paul Nitz. So these were the geniuses of nuclear warfighting, and I studied it. And there was a lot of technicalities, counter force, counter value, first strike, second strike, et cetera. They had different views on certain things, but they all said one thing: don't go there. And what they meant was avoid escalation. Nobody wakes up and says, hey, nice day for a nuclear war, I think I'll fire a missile. It's more the case that somebody does something, the other side retaliates, the first side raises the ante, the next side comes back, and you keep escalating, and you get to a point where finally somebody is trapped. They're like, okay, this is now existential. My country is at risk. My regime is at risk, et cetera. I'm thinking about shooting nuclear weapons. And here you get into game theory, a game theoretic approach, where the side that wasn't going to shoot first shoots first because they think the other side is going to shoot first. In other words, it's always better. First strike is always better than second strike. So if you think the other guy's going to shoot, then you shoot first, even though you didn't start out that way. And we saw a real world example of this in 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And what did Kennedy and Khrushchev do? They were going down this path. Everyone said, don't go there. And they de-escalated. Khrushchev pulled the missiles out of Cuba. U.S. pulled its missiles out of Turkey. U.S. promised not to invade Cuba. Some of this was known at the time, some not, but there were some quid pro quos, but we de-escalated, got through it. So between the scholarly approach, which I just talked about, and the practical application, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's been understood ever since. Today, we have a very lightweight crowd, warmongers, people who don't understand what I just described, or if they do, they trivialize it, and they're throwing nuclear war fighting talking points around like they're candy canes or something, and they are escalating. We're doing exactly what you're not supposed to do. With the U.S. sanctions, but U.S. providing long-range artillery to Russia, U.S. and U.K. blow up the Nord Stream pipeline, blow up the Kerch Strait Bridge. Russia says, okay, gloves are off. We're taking down the power grid in the rest of Ukraine. The U.S. says, okay, here come the Patriot missiles. And Russia says, we'll take them out before you launch them because we got hypersonic missiles. We're doing exactly what everyone said not to do. We're heading for nuclear war. I don't know when cooler heads are going to prevail, but they may not.
Thank you. So when we come back, this was part one of a 4-part series with Jim. He's covered 2 major subjects, China and Russia. And as we promised at the Rich Dad Radio Show, it's the good news and bad news about money. I mean, most of this is bad news. We need to figure out what we can do for the good news. But what Jim is saying is that a lot of people think we can have a small nuclear war. And what happens when somebody pushes one button? People start pushing other buttons. And we're at a very critical time in world history. So we'll be right back with the second part of this. Is what can we do about Russia and China? We'll be right back.
Good.